Welcome to Tech in the Right Direction, the podcast. This week, I'll be speaking with Estelle Giraud. Estelle is a PhD scientist, population genetics, turned commercial operator and leader in biotech and frontier medicine at Illumina, and now turned founder. Estelle believes people don't neatly fit in single boxes, and some of the most interesting insights about people and the world come from the unplanned intersections. She brings authenticity and openness to tough conversations about the hard problems we face and thrives in finding new understanding through conversation. Welcome to the show, Estelle. I'm so happy to have you on.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Great. Well, let's get started. So, Estelle, as a woman in tech, can you share with us your career journey and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, and I'll try and make this brief, but sorry, excuse me. I'm also recovering from COVID.
Oh, I hope
Um,
you feel better.
yeah, I have peppermint tea on the go. Um, so I am trained as a population geneticist. I spent a long time at university, did a PhD in population genetics, and really was down an academic track in my career for a long time. I've always loved the sciences, various different stems, but genetics in particular really captured my interest from an early age. And I love the idea that we all have this kind of blueprint inside of us that directs everything from our health to, how we exist in the world, but it's not prescriptive. There's control that we have there, and there's all these complex mathematical relationships with how we who we are as a human species that is
Mhm.
codified in our genetics. And so that was the early part of my career. I then segued that and spent about a decade in industry working for one of the largest biotechs in the world. For anybody that's familiar with med tech or genetics, the company is Illumina. And they were at the forefront of this industry for a really long time. They still are. And I was responsible for building out their population genetics team and applications in the US. And so that was managing a $400 million plus business and growing that. And it gave me a frontline seat into commercial sales, marketing, how to think about product market fit, how to think about tech industries more broadly. And I saw a number of different things through that kind of journey, but various aspects of the way that medicine was going laid very heavily on my heart and my mind. And I saw problems in this industry, from ethical to just the way that our data infrastructure systems are set up. And I firmly believe in the promise of precision medicine. This idea medicine can be data driven and predictive and really, really personalized. And genetics is a big piece of that. Um, but there's real limitations in us being able to get there right now. And so I left Illumina and I'm now building a software company, um, with a very small team of people. And we're trying to craft a different future for this and really kind of enable this data driven medicine, but putting people right at the center of their health data. And so I'm happy to talk more about Trellis Health, but in essence, that's what we're working towards.
That is fascinating, and your background is so interesting. And I'm so proud as a woman that you have this biotech and genetics background. That's just awesome. And I love that you're taking now with your own company, Trellis, taking that and making it something that is ethical and is smart and is needed, with your software company. So that's just amazing. So great job. So, can you share with us our growing understanding of genetics will impact the future of human health and why there's so much space to innovate in healthcare, even though it's not that simple?
Yeah, there's a lot wrapped up
There's
in
a
that.
lot in there, yes.
um, I mean, maybe I'll tackle it this way. Healthcare has notoriously been one of the hardest industries innovate in. And I think it's multi-layered in that it's a highly regulated space. It's incredibly complex, particularly here in the US, and it's unique, largely unique as an industry, because it's not a simple kind of buyer seller. It's, you've got layers of different companies and healthcare providers and insurance payers and employers paying for healthcare benefits, and they're all wrapped up in an industry, and so it's really complex to be able to find business models that work. At the same time, it tends to be a fairly conservative industry, and rightly so. You're talking about people's health and people's lives, and so you don't want to be taking enormous unproven risks in technology. And there's stories throughout the history, in particular recent history, with companies like Theranos and others that didn't come from really solid scientific backgrounds and moved too quickly in healthcare and caused a lot of damage. And so you have to balance that in healthcare. At the same time, there are tremendous advancements in technology, and I'm really optimistic. I'm really bullish on the next 100 years, the next 50 years, really being the century of biology and medicine, and us seeing drastic improvements in how we think about human health. And part of that is because we're starting to be able to measure things like genetics at really high resolution, and we never have before. And genetics is just one piece of it. The other pieces are things like wearable technology, or understanding mental health better. There's all these aspects about health that have traditionally not been part of medicine, but we're starting to measure them today. And so the data is getting richer and richer, and medicine is essentially turning into a data science, and it will continue to do so over the coming decades. And with that, with AI and some of the advancements in computer science, you're coming at this intersection where we could start to see precision medicine and medicine that's really tailored to the individual, instead of this one size fits all approach. Our entire medical care system is kind of based on the average person and a standard of care and a clinical trial, where an average, even our medication doses are based on averages of studies, and it's not really tailored. But you can imagine a future where that starts to get really, really tailored, and you got to go to a doctor, or doesn't matter what health condition you're dealing with, or even just trying to live the healthiest life possible, be able to get recommendations and treatments that are really unique for you and your makeup. And it sounds obvious to say this, but genetics is such a core piece of that, and it's not been possible until very recently. So what used to cost in the Human Genome Project era, which wasn't that long ago, this is 2 decades ago, that was millions of dollars, billions. And now we're talking about being able to fully sequence a human genome for $200.
Wow.
And the cost is just coming down. And so that makes it accessible for people. And whether that's through companies like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA, some of these pioneers of the direct-to-consumer genetic testing markets, they've done a lot in making this really accessible to the public. But you can also think about this being a standard of care in future from your doctor, through your healthcare. It's a standard of care or becoming a standard of care in pregnancy. I believe within the next 5 years or so, 90% of people in developed countries will have some kind of genetic testing done on themselves. And today, there's not a really safe place to put that information and then have that information be leveraged for your personal healthcare journey. And so, a big part of our mission at Trellis Health is to create this really safe place for this data to live and then impact your health and your children's health and your family's health.
Wow. That is amazing. So many thoughts going through my head. As you said, all of these different things. And I'm so bullish, like you, about the future. I mean, it's amazing that we've had all this data, but as I think about doctors' offices, it's all manual, right? They never really used computers, and still today they're using file folders in some cases, you know?
Yes.
So yeah,
Yes.
so that data now, as it starts to populate, now they can see more patterns, and it's more individualized rather than, you know, just the average person. So I
Mhm.
think that could be huge for the future. So yes, thank you. Thank you for finding this software program and putting it together at Trellis to take that data and keep it in a safe place, because, you know, privacy is very critical for this information.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in addition to being a founder, you're also a mom. So share with us how motherhood makes you a better founder and vice versa.
Yeah. So the short version of this is that I am also extremely bullish on the positive impact of being a parent and what that does to a, you know, a career. And it
Mhm.
doesn't it's not just a founder, right? It's, you know, whatever people choose to do, and even if that's stay at home or, you know, whatever it is, it's a superpower from a woman's perspective to be able to do that with your body,
Mhm.
and to have the kind of on one sense, it's the purpose that that gives you. It opens up a lot of ways of thinking about the world, but
Mhm.
it also constrains certain things as well. So, you know, I have constrained time
Mhm.
in a very practical sense. And so it forces you to be ruthless with time, and really targeted about what you're doing, and make faster decisions and move through things faster, and be really cognizant of what you're taking on and what you're outsourcing, and how you're managing your time and your purpose and your passion with what you want to be doing with your time. And I honestly, like, from a founder's perspective, that is a superpower.
Yeah.
It's We could talk a lot, I think, about the different ways that, especially being a mother, as a woman and a mother in tech, is perceived, particularly by investors and around fundraising, and in women in positions of leadership, while also, you know, having young children or being pregnant. There is a whole lot to talk about there, and um, to deconstruct in future. You know, there's
Mhm.
still layers of bias and limitations that exist around that. But I am unapologetic of the journey that I went through to motherhood, what I feel like that has given me as a founder in terms of purpose, and you know, what I'm doing at Trellis Health. And then it's also just given me insight into the human condition. And we haven't covered this yet, but Trellis Health, initially, our target audience and our first product is really built around pregnancy,
Mm.
and helping women manage their bodies and their health through this really intense period of time. Um, and for a lot of reasons, this just makes perfect sense from a market standpoint, and from the gaps that women experience during healthcare in that time, as well as outcomes. You know, the US has one of the worst maternal mortality rates in the world, and certainly in the developed world.
Mhm.
And so there's such an opportunity for impact there as well. And I would not have had those insights. So Trellis Health would not be targeting this particular time point in a person's life if I hadn't experienced this myself. And so it's a perspective that I bring that, you know, a male founder that's never personally experienced this wouldn't necessarily bring that knowledge to the problem space that we're
Mhm.
solving in. And so, you know, that experience of motherhood is a superpower in terms of what we're building at Trellis Health, and how we go about building that, and also how we go about building our culture as a company. You know, culture is, I firmly believe culture is the superpower of any startup.
Mhm.
And being able to craft a different narrative to what that culture means in these really fast moving, high stakes businesses like startups are. Many days it's like life or death situation for the company, but at the same time, we're all humans. We all have our journey. We have other things. We're multifaceted people. We get purpose from different areas of our life. And so being able to intentionally craft a culture around just being a human first is really important to me and to our team.
I think that's fascinating. And you experienced it firsthand. So you have the best knowledge and the best applications for that knowledge in your organization that no male could have. I mean, it's just amazing. That's firsthand experience. And culture, yes, culture, not just in startups, but in any organization, culture is the foundation. You have to have a good culture in order to grow and thrive. So that's really, really important things that you mentioned. You also said you've learned the value of time, which time is so important when you have family and work and trying to balance it all. Time is the one thing that doesn't stand still, right? So you have to make the best of each day and each minute and each day. I pretty much, do that every day so that I can really expand my day as much as possible. Yes.
Yeah. Time is finite, and it's a work in progress for me, but deconstructing some of the ideas that we have about time and how we use time, and but trying to optimize that, I think, is a worthy endeavor. And I wouldn't have paid so much attention to it when you have this kind of endless time, what feels like endless time pre-parenthood.
That you can devote to your business, Now it's a finite time because another little being needs you, right? And needs your time.
Yeah. And it's also about managing, like I've been having this conversation a lot recently, but managing energy versus managing time. And so not feeling the pressure to be, okay, I must work 9 to 5 and this is my work time and it's locked in and regimented, and then I have this other time block over here that's also you're fitting and contorting your body and your brain and what you're doing into these constructs of time. And I much prefer, and I'm more productive and far more free when I'm thinking about my energy. So some days that looks like me putting my child to bed and working all evening because it gives me purpose and I'm invigorated by that. And I want to do that. And it's like, what do I want to do with my time? And then some days I'm leaving early and I'm going to the park for however long with my child. And that gives me energy as well to attack the next day.
It's a blend. It's not a balance. It's a blend. You have to think of it that way and blend what is needed at any given time and give that your full attention. And that's where you will really, really succeed.
Yeah, completely.
That's great. And I think you're figuring that out just as being a parent and running a business is not easy. But it's a blend. You need to just give it all your focus when you're in that moment rather than trying to think about where you should be next. Yeah. So Estelle, what are some frameworks and mental models for thinking about entrepreneurship and the product market fit as a science of an ecosystem?
Yeah. I am a scientist by training. Spent close to a decade at university, and you hear this story, right? It's kind of idealized in Silicon Valley, especially, about like a PhD dropout founder and somebody that's being exposed to that and decided, no, I just want to go and do it, and I want to start a company and I'm going to learn as I do it. And that is definitely a path. I think there is another path there, though, where being a scientist and being taught how to think like a scientist and run experiments like a scientist is really beneficial for business. And you know, in classic kind of, you have a hypothesis and you design an experiment and you test it and you get the result and then you iterate on that. That's the scientific process. That's what I am taught to do as a scientist. It's also incredibly valuable for building a company and thinking about product market fit in these early
Mhm.
days of starting a company. You know, everything that you're doing is an experiment, and you're testing and you're collecting data and you're trying to understand the way that the worlds work, or the way human behavior works, or, you know, whatever it is. And so thinking about it from, you don't want to over optimize in terms of experiments, but I do think a lot about frameworks for the different way businesses work, or, you know, a consumer business versus a B2B business, and designing experiments to test things and then collect that feedback, iterate on that, and do the next test. And the faster you can move through that cycle as a founder, um, the faster you can get to what is real signal. And in part of it, it's also like a, you know, first principles kind of way of thinking as well. When you're forced to design an experiment, you have to go back to, okay, what is it that I'm actually testing? What am I doing here? And from my perspective with Trellis Health, um, you know, we're in healthcare and we're consumer software. And a lot of people
Mhm.
really balk at that intersection. You know, they're like, what? I'm either comfortable with healthcare, and there's all these models and frameworks for B2B and enterprise business models in healthcare. And then there's this separate world over here, which is about consumer behavior and psychology and advertising and customer acquisition cost, and like the way that people behave. There are not many companies and business models that really kind of exist in between. But from a first principles kind of way of thinking about it, there are several things. So one is, I spent close to a decade, you know, in my corporate life selling B2B enterprise deals into the US healthcare system. So, you
Mhm.
know, tens of millions of dollar plus deals. It's there are constraints in that world. You know, every single hospital is different. You're forced to fit into their existing structures, their long, complex sales cycles. Um, and I firmly believe that just you will not build something radically different if you force it into an existing system. It's
Mhm.
you are defining what you build by the constraints of that system. And so if you want to build something radically different, you have to go outside of that. And then you've got the flexibility to reimagine, okay, what could this look like? What should this look like? Um, but then you
And
have
that's very
different,
important. Yeah, that's very important to
yeah,
be able to look at it from scratch, not try to mold it into something that's already there.
yes, yes.
Mhm.
But then you've got different kind of, you know, frameworks and things that you have to test with consumers. And so, I mean, to cut a long story short here, right, we went through this kind of exercise of, okay, strip away all of our existing assumptions and what we think about the world, and that's also a scientific trait. Like, let's
Mhm.
not take that assumed knowledge for granted, and let's think about, okay, what are we actually testing, what are we measuring here? And if you start from the very bottom and you work your way up, you start recognizing, okay, this is an assumption, let's test this. We're not going to build something different in this context, so let's reimagine it with a different baseline. And you can get to a product strategy and a company strategy that's really unique in that context, and then you go about testing it. And so that's it, it doesn't happen overnight, but you know, that happened in parallel to me being pregnant, and it was really, really insightful as a
Mm.
process.
Wow. Yeah, that's so important. And you hit on all the key pieces from, strategy to process to systems that are so important. So thank you for that. So let's jump into privacy.
Mm,
Privacy is on everybody's mind. I mean, we talk about, giving our information in so many places, what people do with it, how it's how it's distributed, when it's distributed, sometimes without our permission.
Yeah.
So why is privacy in the health information system so important?
Yeah, I would argue that this is some of the most personal data that we own. It's and it is bought and sold today. Like, we can talk
Mm-hmm.
about all the different ways that this information is kind of shared through the ecosystem, many times without consumers even having knowledge that
Right.
it's been shared. But um it's an area that's extremely close to my heart. Back when I was in college and in academia and doing my PhD, I got very deep into the ethics of genetics and the privacy
Mm-hmm.
around that, and wanted to be an ethicist with some of this kind of genetic technology as it's starting to impact humanity. And so, from an ethical perspective, I love that intersection between ethics and genetics. But then
Mm-hmm.
in a healthcare setting, I feel like it's accelerating today in not a good direction. And this is what gives me a certain sense of urgency with what we're doing with Trellis Health. Is I want my children to grow up in a world where this data is protected, and it
Mm-hmm.
and it is theirs, and they're not going to be discriminated against because of certain pieces of that data. um but
Tell me a little more
today,
about that, discriminated against. How would that work? Well, how does it work
uh,
today that you don't want that to happen in the future?
so there's two axes that I see, and there's probably more, but like, just at a high level, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you've seen the movie Gattaca.
No.
it's I mean, it's old. I'm dating myself here. It's worth the watch if somebody's after like a OG um genetic sci-fi movie that was made several decades ago, that is actually coming true today. So it's about designing humans and designing traits for
Mm-hmm.
humanity. So, like, anything from making sure that people don't have cancer or a risk of
Mm-hmm.
cancer, to they don't have a genetic predisposition to heart disease, or they have perfect 20/20 vision. It's a sliding scale there of traits, and it's a slippery slope of what do we want the future to look like. I think one of the main drivers of that is economic discrimination. So things like pre-existing conditions. We don't want to economically disadvantage somebody that has a different genetic risk makeup
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
than somebody else. So you could imagine a world, I'm being like, this is, dystopian and not what we want the world to be, but you can imagine a world where a wealthy person could have access to these technologies, IVF and
Mm-hmm.
selection, where they can screen out diseases from their family lines
Mm-hmm.
and have children that don't have these health risks,
Mm-hmm.
and have health insurance and access to health insurance because of that. And at the other end of the spectrum, uh, a family that doesn't have those economic means, can't screen it out, has those pre-existing conditions, is not able to get health insurance, and then
Yeah.
is kept at a lower socioeconomic. You're almost creating like a genetic class
Mm-hmm.
system,
Mm-hmm.
just with really simple economics around pre-existing health conditions.
Wow.
Um, Now, obviously, there's like a lot between where we are today and that potential future, but part of it is this idea that your genetic information, and how, whether you choose to, whatever you choose to do, right? That's your life, that's your choice, but it should be private. And I also don't trust necessarily that the laws are always going to move in the right direction. And so
Mm-hmm.
a big part of what we're doing at Trellis Health is creating this ultra private system where people can contribute to research if they choose to, they can share the data if they choose to, but they don't have to. They can keep it really private, and we put all of that agency and kind of health ownership, health data ownership back in the hands of the individual and protect that information. So like on a genetic standpoint, that's one future. The other thing that I do want to mention is what's happening today with women's reproductive rights in the US and
Mhm.
everything around that. Like your health and your choice and your body is your decision. And
Right.
today, there's a lot of ways that this information flows through systems without people consenting to having that information released. And so
Mhm.
being able to say, okay, this is your health, your information, your journey, you have ownership over that, and you can share that with whoever you choose, but you don't have to share it,
Right.
is really important.
I love that. Come on, Trellis, make this happen.
I have a lot of urgency around this privacy, and these are just two examples, but
Yeah,
there's a lot of
it
different ways that you
is.
can think about the way the future unfolds. And we're at a tipping point, I feel like, with like the software and the architecture and the systems need to be built today to make sure that we get to that tomorrow that is built in a good way for humanity.
Right, right. And we need people like you that are thinking that way, the ethics involved with everything and how you get the choice of where your data is and who's accessing it and where it's going
Hmm.
and how it's being used. That's so important. And today there's all kinds of unethical ways, people are getting data.
Yeah, one other thing that I want to mention really quickly on this is
Mhm.
today, this is this is a $10 billion plus industry with companies that are buying and selling health data, and it's completely legal under HIPAA because they just de-identify the data set and kind of
Mhm.
tokenize it in ways.
Mhm.
Um, and so you don't need to sign a release, you don't need to consent to anything as a patient or as a consumer,
Yes.
and it's just bought and sold, through these marketplaces.
Mhm.
That's fine until you get to genetics.
Right.
Genetics are not able to be really easily de-identified, or they can be cracked, and there's a whole like your genetics is your identity. This is how
Right.
forensics works for anybody
Mhm.
that's watched CSI. You know, this is your identity. And so I really, I think a lot about the future of these health data marketplaces once you start putting genetics in there. And genetics it's a very important part of somebody's health.
Yeah, no, very true. All right. So, as a female executive in this tech industry, I'm sure it's very male dominated in your world.
Hmm.
Can you share a couple of experiences that really stand out that made you who are you are today, like life lessons, maybe?
Yeah, there's several. I think I'm optimistic that the world is changing, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly raising money and building a company as a female CEO, as a new mother in tech, trying to raise venture capital money,
Mm-hmm.
less than
Mm-hmm.
2% of all venture dollars goes to women
Right.
today, and that's
Right.
just a ridiculous statistic.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
um,
I agree.
and it means that we're missing out on the insights that women bring to the way that our world works. Like we were saying earlier in the discussion, a male wouldn't have the same experience that I had through pregnancy and through that
Mm-hmm.
health journey, and wouldn't bring the same um, knowledge to that space that I
Mm-hmm.
bring. And so they're not going to create Trellis Health the same way that
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Right.
doing. And
Right.
and if you fund 98% of uh of these male run
Mm-hmm.
businesses,
Mm-hmm.
you're missing out on that other half of all the diversity that comes with somebody that thinks differently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is a problem that goes all the way up the funnel as well, because it's LPs and all the way up the fundraising cycle.
Mm-hmm.
I think change comes from founders really looking at diversity on their cap tables and generating wealth for the next wave of investors, and having that next wave of investors be diverse. And then they can invest in diverse VCs to manage that money, and look at, you know, a female VC and say, okay, she's going to align with and see different things to invest in than maybe a male VC would. And then that flows down to female founders and female entrepreneurs. And so I think it's this like cycle of change, and I'm optimistic that it's happening. I'm seeing a lot of, you know, really good movements. At the same time, like with the market conditions this year in particular, I don't want to see us lose some of those gains. A lot of these funds, these new kind of funds that focus on diversity, are very new. And so with some of the market conditions this year, and kind of the tech market kind of crashing a bit, like I don't want to see those gains lost. We have to be diligent throughout the whole ecosystem to make sure that we're having diverse representation all the way through.
And we're seeing
it's hard. It's really hard.
It's really hard. And 2% is a ridiculous statistic, and there's no reason for that. You know, it's just a mindset. So these VCs need to start looking at the benefits of a diverse workforce, the benefits of what women bring to the table. There's a lot, you know, from empathy to collaboration to profitable businesses. They, you know, women, there's stats that show that. So it really is important for them to realize that. And so I'm glad you're seeing some movement with the new funds in different ways, but I hope you're right. I hope it changes very, very soon.
Yeah.
So this is on a personal note. So in closing, Estelle, what's your favorite place that you've traveled to and why?
Oh man, this is
tough.
This is a tough one.
But if the first one comes to your mind, what is it?
And
this is kind of a selfish question, just because I want new places to travel to, and it gives me great ideas.
So I'll try and keep this short. My father is French. My mother is Australian. My father was a sailor and left France in his early 20s, hitchhiked on boats and worked on boats, and eventually landed in Australia, but has always loved the Indian Ocean, Mediterranean. He settled in a very small island that is still part of France called Réunion Island, Ile de la Réunion. And had a house there, and I used to travel there as a child and through my teenage years, and it was just this really unique mix of cultures, and it's a beautiful island. It's volcanic. It's it feels very, very far away from everything, and I love that.
We need that some days, just to disconnect completely, right? Just to go over somewhere where you can't get service, so that you can just think and clear your mind. I need that desperately. That sounds wonderful.
There's a lot. I have been blessed and feel very fortunate with the privilege of being able to see a lot of different parts of the world, and all through Australia, Asia, and
when was the last time you went there?
Okay, so pandemic aside, I haven't traveled. Pandemic and being pregnant and starting a company, I haven't left to do any travel in many years. And I don't know when it's going to happen again. Everybody was in Europe this summer, and I was heads down building products.
Right. You have a lot on your plate right now, so that takes precedence. But now that it's coming back to your mind, maybe you'll plan a trip in the next few years there. Oh, that sounds great. So Estelle, can you share with our listeners how they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, so we are on social media platforms as My Trellis Health. I am also on Twitter. Estelle Giraud on Twitter. I talk about being a founder, being a woman in tech, being a mother, privacy, health data, genetics, kind of everything that we've spoken about today. So people are welcome to follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And then, yeah, if they want to keep tabs on what we're doing at Trellis Health as we grow, and feel free to follow along there as well.
That's great. Well, Estelle, this was such an honor, and you are a wealth of information that I didn't really think about so much before, but now it's really top of mind, between genetics and privacy and data. There's just so many pieces to it. And I can't wait till Trellis is going, because it will be amazing, with the thought and the effort you've put through to build the platform that people will love is really, really important today. And so good luck to you. And I really, really enjoyed our time together. So thank you.
Thank you. I did as well.
Thank you for listening to Tech in the Right Direction. Please take a minute to subscribe or follow so that you never miss an episode. Also, don't forget to like, share, and comment. Thank you. See you next week.
From IT skill enhancements to end-user adoption training, Directions Training is your resource to help optimize the effectiveness of your technology investments. Over 500,000 students have taken advantage of our wide selection of technology and business training solutions, covering the most popular applications today, such as Microsoft 365, Azure, Windows 10, and more. As a podcast listener, we invite you to take advantage of an exclusive offer. Receive 30 days of free access to our Microsoft official curriculum on-demand courses for IT professionals or end users. Visit us at www.directionstraining.com/podcast to claim this offer today. Hurry, this offer is only available for a limited time. Success is a journey. Ask for directions.